In a world that endlessly chants the praises of kindness, compassion, and mercy, there is a dangerous silence lurking beneath those noble ideals. A silence Machiavelli broke centuries ago with the stroke of a pen. That silence conceals an uncomfortable truth. Kindness, unchecked and unconditional, is often the doorway to ruin. Niccolò Machiavelli, the master of political realism, was not a cruel man, but a clear-eyed observer of power and the nature of men. He understood something most leaders, lovers, and even ordinary people fail to grasp. There comes a moment when kindness no longer works. And when that moment arrives, cruelty must not only be accepted, it must be wielded with precision, strategy, and purpose. This is the law of necessary cruelty, a law not born from malice, but from experience, a principle not made to destroy, but to survive and to lead. Let us begin this journey not with warmth, but with cold reality, because power, real power, demands that you learn when to stop forgiving, when to stop explaining, when to stop hoping that decency alone will get you what you want, and instead act. The illusion of endless kindness. We are taught from birth to be kind. We are told that kindness is strength, that if we are good enough, patient enough, generous enough, eventually the world will reward us. But those who cling blindly to kindness in all circumstances quickly discover the world is not designed to reward kindness, but to exploit it, just as water takes the shape of the vessel that contains it. People mold themselves to what you allow. If you are always forgiving, they will always transgress. If you are always understanding, they will always test. If you are always soft, they will press harder. Machiavelli did not write for saints. He wrote for rulers, for the bold, for those who do not wish to be at the mercy of others. And he made one thing abundantly clear. If you refuse to use cruelty when necessary, you are not virtuous. You are weak. Kindness without boundaries is not a virtue. It is a liability. It is not a noble act to let the wolf devour your flock, because you refuse to raise a spear. It is not compassion to watch your kingdom rot, because you hesitate to punish the corrupt. There is a threshold, and when it is crossed, kindness must end, not with rage, but with resolve, not with chaos, but with calculation. This is the Machiavellian doctrine, not of chaos, but control. The nature of men, why cruelty becomes necessary. Machiavelli, in his seminal work The Prince, lays out a view of human nature that is brutal, yet eerily accurate. Men are ungrateful, fickle, false, cowardly, covetous. He does not say this with hatred, but with clarity. He says it because a ruler or any person who holds power must deal with men as they are, not as they should be. You are not dealing with ideals. You are dealing with fear, ambition, envy, greed, and betrayal. If you bring only kindness to the battlefield, you will lose. And not only lose, you'll be used over and over by those who have no interest in your softness. Here is the truth Machiavelli makes unmistakably clear. A prince who is not himself wise cannot be well advised, and no man who continues to treat treacherous subjects with gentle hands will survive their blades. Cruelty, then, becomes necessary, not as the first weapon, but as the final one. Used sparingly, used strategically, used only when kindness has failed, but used without hesitation. Because once hesitation enters the heart of a leader, the wolves gather. And once the wolves smell indecision, the leader is no longer feared. And if you are not feared, you are finished. Fear versus love, the eternal question. Perhaps one of the most debated principles in The Prince is this. It is much safer to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both. This is not a condemnation of love. It is a prioritization of reality. People will love you as long as it serves them, but they will fear you if they know you are capable of punishment. And fear keeps men in check far longer than love. Not all people can love rightly, but all men can fear. This is where necessary cruelty becomes surgical. Cruelty must not be wild, chaotic, or bloodthirsty. It must be swift, memorable, and above all, justifiable. The aim is not cruelty for its own sake, but for order. Cruelty, when done right, is a signal, a reminder, a message sent to everyone watching that you will not be tested twice. Machiavelli praises Cesare Borgia, not for being brutal, but for using targeted cruelty to instill lasting stability. When Borgia faced rebellion and disloyalty, he appointed a cruel man, Ramiro de Orco, to restore order. Once the order was restored, he had Ramiro executed in a very public fashion. The message? Order has returned. The punishment is done. The prince remains in control. A masterstroke. The cruelty served its purpose, and then was removed. This is Machiavelli's art of cruelty. Not endless brutality, but efficient domination. The cost of hesitation. Let's consider the opposite approach. What happens when cruelty is avoided? Even when it's necessary. Collapse. Reputation dies. Enemies grow bold. Friends turn opportunistic. Those who once respected you begin to laugh in private. Why? Because your kindness is no longer seen as strength. It is seen as weakness. And weakness is never admired in those who lead. History is filled with kings, CEOs, generals, and lovers who failed not because they lacked intellect, but because they lacked spine. They saw betrayal and chose diplomacy. They saw disobedience and chose mercy. They saw threats and chose forgiveness. And in doing so, they were destroyed. If you are seen as incapable of defending your position, you will lose that position. There are moments in life when the only path forward is not through persuasion, but through power. Cruelty with vision, the higher order. Now here lies a crucial truth. Cruelty is only justified when it serves a higher purpose. This is not a license for violence or malice. Machiavelli was not advocating sadism. He was advocating stability. He believed that cruelty, used once and effectively, could prevent more chaos, more bloodshed, and more suffering in the long term. Like a surgeon who cuts deep to remove a tumor, you must sometimes act harshly to remove the infection in your realm. Whether that be betrayal in your business, a toxic relationship, a corrupt advisor, or a disloyal subordinate. Act once, act decisively, and then bring peace. This is the law of necessary cruelty, not eternal violence, but single, unforgettable moment that reestablishes your power and your boundaries. If done right, you rarely have to do it again. And this is how rulers preserve peace, not by endless appeasement, but by the strategic use of fear. In the modern world, you may not be a prince, but you still hold power in relationships, in business, in leadership, in your personal decisions. And the lesson remains the same. Be kind, be just, be reasonable. But never let kindness become your weakness. Never tolerate repeated disrespect. Never allow others to grow bold in your silence. Because if they do, you will lose not only their respect, but your own. Sometimes you must cut ties. Sometimes you must fire the disloyal. Sometimes you must walk away without explanation. Sometimes you must expose betrayal for what it is, even when the world calls it harsh. That is cruelty, but it is necessary cruelty, because without it, you will drown in your own kindness. You will become the prey. And Machiavelli reminds us, there is no nobility in weakness, only tragedy, legacy, and judgment. Machiavelli knew he would be judged for his ideas. He knew the moralists would hate him. He knew his name would become synonymous with cunning and ruthlessness. But he did not care. He wrote what he believed leaders needed to hear, not what they wanted to hear. And in doing so, he gave the world a manual not for brutality, but for clarity. A brutal clarity that sees the world not as it should be, but as it is. So when you find yourself at the edge, surrounded by those who no longer respect your kindness, remember this law. Do not lash out wildly. Do not act out of emotion. Do not become reckless. But when all else has failed, use cruelty, swiftly, strategically, and without regret. Not because you are evil, but because the situation demands it. Because peace is worth preserving, and because your power is worth protecting. You were not born to be trampled. You were born to lead. Kindness is your sword, but cruelty, when required, is your shield. Use both wisely, or be ruled by those who do.